Folks, I have some exciting news to share. Join me for a live podcast recording at the Imperial War Museum in London. On Saturday, October 19th, I'll be participating in the Imperial War Museum's Podcast Live Festival. At this festival, podcasters from across the UK will record episodes in front of a live audience. I'm thrilled to have been asked to record an episode of the World War II podcast there, and I'll be joined by postgraduate researcher Matthew Huff from the University of Leeds. Together, we'll discuss Harold Alexander's role as Supreme Commander in the Mediterranean during World War II. Now, this is a ticketed event, so sign up in advance to secure your spot. And after a full day of live podcast recordings at the Imperial War Museum, there will be a special panel discussion at the Churchill War Rooms. We'll explore the rise of podcasting, share how we got started, and discuss how podcasts are transforming the way we connect with history and bring it to a wider audience. I'd love to see as many of you there as possible, so for more details on tickets and event timings, visit the Imperial War Museum website, iwm.org.uk, and search Podcast Live.
This country is at war with Germany.
We shall go on to the end.
I remember the sheets of flame which came up and almost blinded us from our guns.
In this episode of the World War II podcast, I'm joined by Simon Lewis, author of Making a Bridge Too Far. Released in 1977, A Bridge Too Far stands as the last grand-scale World War II film produced by the Hollywood studio system. The film ambitiously sought to bring to life Operation Market Garden, the bold but ultimately doomed Allied campaign of September 1944, culminating in the failed attempt to capture the bridge at Arnhem. Producer Joseph Levine gathered an incredible ensemble cast featuring legends like Anthony Hopkins, Robert Redford, Sean Connery, James Caan, Michael Caine, Elliott Gould, Dirk Bogarde and Laurence Olivier. The movie was shot on location in Holland, with the town of Deventer doubling as Arnhem to recreate the intense and chaotic battle scenes. Simon, it's great to have you on the show. Let's begin with Cornelius Ryan, the author of the book A Bridge Too Far, which served as the foundation for the film. Ryan was a war correspondent during World War II. Was he actually present at Arnhem? What inspired him to write about Operation Market Garden? Because he'd previously done The Longest Day and I forgot myself the other book.
The Last Battle. Well, I think The Longest Day is actually the key point. Really, he was on the beaches, or saw on the edge of the beaches on June the 6th, and so he has some sort of interest in the battle. But I think after the war, he'd written a number of books that didn't do particularly well, and I think something sort of prompted him to thinking, why has nobody actually written about D-Day? I think there have been lots of sort of individual books by, memoirs of, various, all sorts of people, but nobody had actually pulled the whole thing together. And apparently nobody had sort of done that kind of writing before him. And I think he was the first person, it seems a fairly obvious thing to do now, but he was the first person to think, well, actually, why don't I tell the whole story? And he approached it as a journalist and got quite a lot of money from his publisher to set up sort of offices in, one in Germany, one in America, one in Britain, one in Canada, and sort of encourage people to write in with their memories. I think he put an advert in various papers saying, where were you on June the 6th? So obviously got an avalanche of information, and then he spent an awful lot of time sifting through it, trying to cross-reference. He had a whole card system that he kind of developed. But I think the short answer is his second book was The Last Battle, which I think he got quite frustrated writing that one because one of the main countries involved was Russia, and Russia, unsurprisingly, were not particularly keen to open up their vaults to an American. So I think he found that quite a frustrating process, So I think that's one of the quote unquote weaknesses of that book. The Russian story isn't particularly detailed, but that's no fault of him. I don't know. I think Market Garden struck him as the sort of the logical next step. In some ways it was quite a bold decision from a commercial point of view, in so much as it had virtually no relevance to America at all. When he started research, he realized that, Arnhem was, very much part of the sort of the British military myth. And so there was an awful lot of books about the British side, but very little about the American. So he was sort of keen to sort of change that, not in a sort of nationalistic way, but it just felt that there was another story to be told here. And for instance, the crossing of Nijmegen Bridge was barely mentioned in any of the books. I remember reading many years ago, I think at Urquhart's account, and of course he barely mentions it, unsurprisingly, because he was a bit more involved with other things, really, wasn't he? So I think that was the main reason. I think it's a sort of fairly logical story to tell, really. Although I'm not sure why he didn't do the bulge. I suppose that's another question. I don't know why out of the two.
Maybe he was on the way to the bulge, if you think of the chronology that he's thinking about. I mean, he's not very old when he dies. He's only in his 50s.
Mid-50s. Well, actually, I remember there was a letter that he wrote just after he got his cancer diagnosis, and he knew, God, I've got an awful lot of work to do on Bridge Too Far. And I think he was sort of saying something like, I was really hoping, to carry on my World War II histories or something like that. So, he clearly intended to write more. He would have been like another Anthony Beevor or Max Hastings. Theoretically, he could have worked another 25, 30 years. So I'm sure he would have touched on the bulge next.
Well, I can't help but feel part of his strength is because he is a journalist, but oddly, he sort of has a foot in both camp as being the historian and depending. And so he writes the history with a journalistic speed to that narrative, so it keeps you going rather than it being a dry kind of who does what to. I'm starting to lose interest.
Well, I think and I think it's interesting that now I suppose I've sort of put my head above the parapet as kind of being related to this film. I've sort of got into a few, shall we say, online discussions, quote unquote, debates, all about sort of the veracity of Ryan's book, and people saying, it's all biased and it's a load of old bilge and it's a load of sort of it's totally inaccurate and all this kind of stuff. And you're thinking, well, you're talking about a book that was written 50 years ago. An awful lot of research that's been done in Arnhem ever since that has a lot to do with that book. That book was the starting point. I mean, probably my favorite emotional film is Waterloo, which I wrote a book about. That film gets a lot of criticism by historians. Say, it's not this, not that, they got this wrong, they got that wrong. But quite often the more, shall we say, a lot of the historians, they'll kind of think, well, actually, my interest in history or the Napoleonic Wars came from watching that film. And so on the whole, they tend to be a bit more sympathetic and realize, actually, there's so much research and stuff has come out since that. And I think that's very, very true of Arnhem. But this idea that Cornelius Ryan was biased and he was trying to sort of get over some particular point of view is utter bilge, and I am going to kind of say that up front. I think he tried I think he did his absolute best to tell a very even-handed story. And also another thing I will say, William Goldman gets an awful lot of stick because he happened to be born an American, and how dare an American write a script about a British, iconic moment, it's got to be crap. It's got to be full of nonsense because he's an American. You're thinking this, again, that's absolute, complete nonsense. And I think his script for the film is probably one of the finest historical film scripts ever written. Sort of getting over the broad brush of the story, the characters and all the rest of it in a fairly coherent way. I think he does a magnificent job. You're never going to please everybody. There's all sorts of, anyone with a knowledge of history is going to say, well, why wasn't there more of this? Why was more of that? Why was this why is it, for instance, why has Sergeant Dohan got this sort of separate little mini film within himself? Why couldn't they have done the same with paratroopers in Oosterbeek? You're thinking, well, where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line?
Yes, and this comes back. I love the fact that you've been trolling the forums on Market Garden, because I tend to think you can't win. However definitive somebody's last history is, someone complains about it. Someone might have a PhD on their thesis on Market Garden and written an enormous book, and then you get one person going, well, I don't agree with that bit. And and you think, well, This guy knows what he's talking about. You're disagreeing it. And hang on, we've got someone here with who just focuses on armour. And they say that, and you think, well, it's almost the blame game. And actually, I'm not sure that Ryan's necessarily writing that book. I did wonder if, after writing The Longest Day, which obviously becomes that huge blockbuster film in 1962, I did wonder how much he was writing A Bridge Too Far with a nod to it becoming a film, knowing that he has to make money because he's terminally ill.
Yeah, he co-wrote The Longest Day. He also was commissioned to write a script for The Last Battle, and that was going to be financed by MGM, but that fell through. So, and he was aware of the plans to do the film, but I don't think that wasn't his motivation at all. So I don't think that was. I don't think he was thinking, oh, how will this work on a movie? I don't think that was at all. I really don't think. So I don't think that quite necessarily holds up, really.
So it's the American film producer Joseph Levine who buys the film rights to A Bridge Too Far. How did that come about? Because we've sort of alluded it to being in. Maybe it's because we're British. We feel it's a British story. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe in America they go, well, actually, don't forget two of those big drops is 82nd and 101st Airborne. How does Levine become involved with it?
Well, he basically retired. I mean, he was probably the most successful American independent producer perhaps of all time. He made sort of hit after hit after hit. Zulu and The Graduate was probably the film that sort of set him up sort of financially. Anyway, so he retired and immediately got bored. Immediately thought, this is not for me. He was friends with Cornelius Ryan. I'm not kind of quite sure what the friendship, how it worked, whether they were just friends because of the movies or the interest or out. I don't know. But anyway, he was. They were aware of each other, and I think Levine was concerned enough about Ryan's sort of problems paying bills and the rest of it to kind of basically say, look, I will buy the film rights. I mean, obviously that's not his primary reason for doing it. I think what excited him was the comeback movie. He'd done everything. He was a rich man. Let's be honest, if he wanted to come back as a film producer and basically a film producer to make profitable movies, he would never, ever, ever have touched A Bridge Too Far. I think he did it as a kind of his comeback thing. What a way to sort of bow out, thinking this is going to be probably the last film I make. Let's make something quality. Let's make something that of some value. And the very fact he enlisted Attenborough. And as I was sort of saying in my book, that Attenborough had only made 2 films before as a director. I mean, obviously he was a very, very experienced and well-respected actor, but he'd only directed 2 movies. They'd been well received, but neither of them had been particularly successful. So again, if Levine was purely in it for the money, he would never have hired Attenborough. He would have hired a kind of a very experienced Hollywood director, somebody that basically just sort of could bring the movie in quickly, inexpensively, but hopefully make some money out of it. So he chose Attenborough because he wanted to make a film of quality, and he knew that Attenborough would bring huge amounts of talent and skill and sensitivity to the subject. And I think that's what makes the film work. It's Attenborough's kind of humanistic sensitivity, isn't it? It's not an action film. It's an action film with emotion and heart, isn't it? A sort of mainstream Hollywood director would have just gone for the action and would have kind of not, shall we say the treatment of facts would be a considerably more elastic than it is now. That's my sort of humble opinion.
It's interesting. I've not thought about it before. I'm not completely sure how much of an action film it is. But it's funny when you look at Attenborough's 2 previous films, All What a Lovely War and Young Winston. Certainly All What a Lovely War, one might not necessarily draw a line from that to A Bridge Too Far. But I guess actually there's a certain scale to All What a Lovely War, which is Attenborough's first film, which demonstrates at least he can produce a film of a scale, which if you're going to be putting your 15 million budget in.
20 million? Yeah, 25.
Is it hard? Does he find it difficult to raise the money? I mean, again, it's a British story. People tend to find that the money comes from the US, so the US like to back more of American stories. Was it difficult for him to raise the cash to put the film together? I mean, I don't know if Attenborough added any weight to help raise that cash.
Well, Levine put some of his own money in. The original story was that he put most of it in. I think apparently he put about 5 or 6 million, which in real terms now, let's say, I think, is it 5 times? So, which would be about $25 million now, real money. So it was quite a lot of money. I think that probably helped to encourage other people. That it was done through sort of pre-sales, where you basically put a package together of a script, director, and particularly stars. You don't have a film, and you just say, you go around to people and say, look, buy the rights to show this film that's not actually made. You can buy the rights at a set amount of money, and that's what you pay. But anything over that, that's yours. And so it's a gamble. And I think, the most skilled independent producers, and Levine was one of the best. Dino De Laurentiis, who the fantastic Italian producer, was a master at this kind of thing. These people, they could sell sort of snow to the Eskimos. They knew how to sell. They knew how to sell, and also they were someone like Levine had a huge track record, and I think that helped. So he could go into a meeting, even though he was quite an old man then, but he said, he could say, look what I've done. Look at the movies that I've done. He made, he would do sort of real sort of mainstream popularist movies, but he also put an awful lot of money into lots of art house movies as well. So he had a really eclectic mix, and he managed to make those things work. And I think he just convinces people. I think he convinced people, look, this is a worthy project. It's a difficult sell. It's going to be a very difficult sell, but the book is very, very successful. I think it was in bestseller list for a while. It's going to be a bit like The Longest Day. So yeah, I think it's just a lot of persuasion. United Artists basically paid the lion's share for it. So he obviously managed to convince to convince them, really. So yeah,
you'd have thought when he was hawking the script round, doing his sales pitch, it must be quite a difficult sell, because often a film will follow a central protagonist or 2 or 3. But A Bridge Too Far is just not at all that kind of film, is it? Is it the structure to tell it from multiple perspectives, and some people only being in and then disappearing out of it? One must have been a hard work to sell. Who made that decision to stick to that kind of overview of the whole operation? Or do we not know? Or rather than sort of follow?
Well, because it's the book. It's the book, and that's what The Longest Day did. So, and obviously the structure of the book is similar, isn't it?
It's not like Hollywood to always stick to the book, though. Based on.
Well, no. But I think let's say another producer. I don't think you would have thought. You wouldn't have thought, right, we'll make a book, A Bridge Too Far, but actually we'll just do the Frost at the Bridge. You might have done that, but you're thinking, well, of course, immediately you think, well, then that's just a British story. Then you might have gone, well, okay, why don't we just do Nijmegen? Why don't we just do the 82nd? But then people thought, well, hang on a minute, what about if you just do that, you're going to get a huge amount of flack from Britain and Commonwealth countries. So that's not going to work. Well, so then we've got to do both. If you're going to do those two, what about the Dutch? Because obviously, it was fought in their country, and there was a huge disaster for the Dutch people. Oh, well, we've got to include them. Well, then if you're going to do that, what about the Germans? Do you see what I mean? So I don't think it would be much more than probably a 5-minute conversation said, we need to sort of roughly follow the scope and scale of the book. But of course, The Longest Day really is the benchmark. That would have been said, do you remember The Longest Day? Because that would only been about just over a decade earlier. So it's still been very fresh. I think it was re-released I think it had a 10-year anniversary in 72, didn't it? I think it had quite.
You forget how films disappeared in the olden days. You might not see them.
A very slight aside. I think film now has really lost its cultural relevance. Weirdly, even though things are on all the time. That's a discussion for another day. But films those days, I think people seem to remember them. People would, even if you see it on release, and it would stick with your mind, and so people would then quite often, when the thing would come back and say, oh yes, let's say somebody got a family within 10 years, say, oh, let's take the kids along. We saw this 10 years ago. That was our date movie. Let's go along and see this, And I think films had an aura then that they do not have now. And of course, The Longest Day, another reason it was successful is it's what sort of God, not that long after the war, a large amount of that, the audience would have been veterans or, wives or girlfriends of veterans. It would have been a very much part of cultural life. And I think we touched on this earlier, even in the early 70s, the war still had a very strong reach, didn't it, over large sections of society, particularly young people as well.
Well, I think it was a way for ex-servicemen to rationalise their experience, to say, this is what I did. Because often, I don't think servicemen understood their part at the time. They didn't understand the part in the war. They didn't know the full strategic picture. Things like war films help locate men's service. And added to that, obviously, in the 1970s, you get World at War, which does the same thing, which explains to people what their part in the war was, because they might not have fully comprehended what their small cog was in the bigger picture. And I think that's arguably the success of the war movie. And as you say, a family event. Let's go and see what Dad did in the war to help you as a child understand what happened.
I think that's true. I think I remember when the film came out, and obviously I was really quite fired up by the history and the rest of it. And I remember finding, I think Horrocks was a TV star. People forget this. I remember my dad sitting me down. We watched, I'm sure it was a film about Arnhem, and he was absolutely captivating. But this sort of stuff was kind of, it was on BBC One. It would be kind of pretty mainstream stuff. It wouldn't be sort of as these history documentaries are, rather sort of pushed out into the outer reaches of BBC Four or whatever. This was BBC One. 9 o'clock. This would be proper sit down stuff that you would watch. It was big stuff. There was a lot of interest in the war, and I think the film kind of came at the back end of that. Now, I mean, you can imagine somebody trying to set up to make a film like Bridge Too Far now, can't you? Or equivalent Battle of the Bulge. You just think it wouldn't get off the ground.
I think it would be a lot more action. Whilst there is a lot of action, I think it would be a lot more crash bang wallop than necessarily telling the story, because we want action. We don't want those sort of overview.
Although actually, I'm going to completely change my mind on that. Of course, for forgetting Band of Brothers, Pacific, and Slightly Less Than Masters of the Air. I think those actually do prove that actually there is an interest in being, telling very detailed stories about the war, albeit from from a point of view of small platoons and things like that. But particularly those first two were magnificent, aren't they? Absolutely magnificent.
Yeah, absolutely super. But when we think about telling that story, obviously those three, Band of Brothers, Masters of War, and the Pacific, are from an American perspective. Now they're like their success. They're like victory. We have the national idiosyncrasy of the British liking disaster, with the plucky Tommy being lifted from the beach. How does Goldman square that circle? Because all the time you're having to think that he's writing for a commercial audience, and he has two audiences that he's trying to write for.
Oh, well, there's a lovely quote, isn't there? Goldman says, he said, the British love a disaster. He said, I think that's one of the things he learned quite quickly. He said, they don't celebrate the victories. They like the disasters. So they love Dunkirk, and they love Arnhem because it's a disaster. It's something, the plucky Brits. So I think he very sort of quickly, perhaps talking with Attenborough, very quickly sort of got a view of sort of the British mindset. I think that Goldman, when I've seen interviews and read stuff with him, you realize he's a very incredibly intelligent man, very sensitive man. When you see him in interview, he holds nothing back, and he really, really is in touch with, well, obviously his emotional side, but his ability to be able to put that onto paper. And I think that is why I think he's probably the finest screenwriter in Hollywood history. I think in terms of the way he wrote, his approach to writing, perhaps like you, I started out ambitions to be a filmmaker, writing scripts, and his stuff was the first stuff, I read his books and that really made sense. And his basic sort of mantra on script writing is you come into a scene as late as possible and get the hell out. And I think it's a wonderful encapsulation of why his writing works so well. And I think it's best served in Bridge Too Far. And you see that time after time. You really feel he's really got the nub of every single scene. What is the emotional core of this scene? What am I trying to get over? And I think that's what he does. But I think in terms of your question about audiences, I think that would have come out with the long discussions with him and Attenborough. They spent quite a lot of time working together. I think Goldman spent a couple of months over in London. He'd be writing during the day and then he'd be talking to Attenborough at night. They did apparently consult other sources, not just Bridge Too Far, but I think they fundamentally felt, well, look, we're adapting a book, so we need to sort of stick to the the source material. As Goldman did admit, and he's admitted it a number of times, he said that he didn't have time to sort of fully research the sort of British mannerisms or ranks or cultural sort of stuff. And so he said the first draft of the screenplay, said he didn't mind if he got not factual things wrong, but sort of the names wrong or the ranks wrong or rest of it. Because as he said, I know this is going to be handed around to experts who will correct it. And that's exactly what happened. So again, this whole thing about, Goldman being an American, didn't know what he was talking about. It's all a load of old nonsense. Doesn't really stand up. He was, like all great artists, very aware of his limitations, very aware of his weaknesses. And there's nothing wrong with that. But more importantly, he had absolutely no issue with those weaknesses being corrected, which is what he did. And he loved working with Attenborough. He found, I think the impression I get is that writers, playwrights, whatever, are particularly well treated in the UK. We have a far more respect for the writer in film and TV than the Americans do. And I think that Goldman, I think that's what he got from Attenborough. So Attenborough would very much be far more respectful about what he did. I'm not saying he wouldn't correct it, but he wouldn't be throwing out, oh, this is rubbish, da, 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 da. He would work together. And I think it was just proper collaboration.
Yeah, well, Goldman has a tremendous track record before this with his Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and All the President's Men, which is, I mean, if you only did one of those films, you would have had a successful career. But then he obviously goes on to do a whole raft of things afterwards. I like the idea that he simplifies it and thought he was going to treat it as a Western with the cavalry coming to the rescue. And it was I could almost see a film pitch going, Bridge Too Far. It's just a Western with the cavalry coming to the rescue. And you go, wow, that's boiled it down to a brisk 30 words.
A very slight aside, I was reading about, the film Battle of the Bulge, which I have a huge amount of affection for, and I forget the nonsense about inaccuracies. But I always remember reading, there's a quote by Caan. It was literally thrown onto the film within 2 weeks of production. And he says something along the lines of, he said, I kind of realized that the theme of the film should be about these lumbering tanks coming out, like these monsters. And, the GIs are just a little, trying to fight off these monsters. And he said, because the film didn't have a theme. And I thought, I remember thinking that was really quite interesting. You realize the amount of kind of films, particularly historical films, which would kind of just go ahead without anyone actually sitting down thinking, what is this film really about? Nobody actually asked those questions. I think something like A Bridge Too Far, I suspect Goldman and Attenborough would have probably had a lot of those sort of philosophical questions about what are we telling here? What are we actually saying here? Rather than just, oh, this is a series of events we're just kind of stringing together.
Well, yeah, when you have that sort of simple thing, it helps drive it all forward. You suddenly go, okay, we know where we're going.
Very interesting. When I was doing some research into the scripts, what I found 2 script drafts. And the first script draft, the one that they actually started filming with, that crucial scene, the famous scene of, Horrocks's speech, it actually ends just before the whole thing about the Western story. The other draft I've got then basically has the, telling, I'd like to think of this as one of those American Western films. So I don't have any information, any sort of proof, but what it looks like to me at some point, the question was asked, well, what is this thing about? Goldman might have said, oh, yes, I think I did write a bit more of that. I'll put that back in. Because it sort of feels odd that it sort of cuts there. It's almost like it might have been in an earlier draft and he put it back in. So I'm not quite sure when that concept came through, but it was obviously, well, at some point, maybe early part production, they might have had that discussion thinking, well, yeah, what is this actually about? What is the story? I've got the story about the American Western.
There is a ridiculous amount of stars in it. Dirk Bogarde, James Caan, Michael Caine, Sean Connery, Edward Fox, Elliott Gould, Anthony Hopkins, Gene Hackman, Laurence Olivier, Ryan O'Neill, Robert Redford. How does that all come about? Is it difficult to get them on board? Often, you hear stars interviewed afterwards. They go, "Oh, we're desperate to do the script because we love the story." Is that the case in this? And there's a lot of stars. You'd have thought they might be all looking over their shoulders at each other, going, "There's too many."
The use of stars is kind of used as a rather sort of cheap shot against the film. Say, oh, well, of course, you can't take it seriously because it's got all these film stars in it. And of course, it would have been so much better if it had complete unknowns. It would have been a far, far, far better film, And I think this is all rather nonsense, really, for a lot of reasons. I mean, the only way that film ever got money is ultimately because of the stars. It wasn't as wonderful as the script is, as wonderful as Attenborough was. It's the fact you've got stars, the fact that Levine got the most box office star in the world at the time, which was Robert Redford. That's what got the money. Was it hard to do? I think the problem that Levine had is that he had to pay up front. So he basically had to enlist these people by paying, rather than sort of giving them percentages, he had to pay up front, and also his deal where it's pay or play. So he had to sign a piece of paper to say, you will work from, March, or no, what is it, May to June in 1976. And this is signed like a year beforehand. Now, if the film collapsed, if it didn't happen, he would still be liable to pay. And I think it was about $9 million. So if the film had fallen through for whatever reason, if the rest of the financing or whatever, Levine would have had to have found about $9 million to pay all these people. Luckily, that didn't happen. Kind of what happened, I think that the one reason a lot of the stars were quite keen on the thing is they realized if the film was a flop, it wouldn't really have affected any of them unless somebody gave a really, really bad performance. Because, they're all, no one would go, oh, well, A Bridge Too Far flop because Gene Hackman. Oh, it was no one would say that. They wouldn't, because there are too many of them. So they're sort of spreading the risk. And I think they felt sort of it was a worthy project. There was a great director. It was a good script. So it was something to sort of get involved with. There was a quote by Michael Caine. Unfortunately, I didn't include it in the book because I couldn't actually find it, but I'm sure it was something along the lines of basically Levine and Attenborough went to Hollywood. They had 1 week in which they wanted to sign up, the 10, 13 names. And so they had meeting after meeting, sets and all that. And apparently at one point they were in the hotel and Michael Caine was there in the lobby and he said something along the lines of, why haven't you asked me? I'll be up for this, or something like that. And so there was a sort of sense of like, well, you're asking all these other people, you're asking Sean, can't I be in it? So there was a bit of that, kind of going on. I think it was basically fundamentally that it was a prestige project. They were going to get paid whatever. And so they couldn't really lose. And also if the film flopped, they weren't going to lose. So it was a kind of a win-win, really.
Yeah, it's an interesting cast of characters. I have to say, my favourite, I think the casting of Edward Fox as Horrocks is inspired. He kind of has what I imagine Horrocks as a young man to be. He's absolutely brilliant. So that summer of is it the summer of 76? Where's it filmed? Because I presume 1970s Arnhem was not the Arnhem of 1944, and I assume that it's not all in the back lot. Not all on the back lot at Pinewood.
The whole film, every single frame of it is filmed in Holland, every single thing. Arnhem was completely destroyed and it's obviously been rebuilt after the war, so they couldn't use that. But there was this little town sort of about 100 miles or something like maybe 50 miles anyway, called Deventer, which weirdly, I mean, it's kind of quite strange how it worked. It basically had a bridge, which was almost identical to Arnhem Bridge. On one side, it had the town. And on the other side, the south side, it had just open farmland and in fact a little Dutch windmill. So on the built-up area, there was a car park, large car park underneath it, which I suppose you probably would have anyway. So that car park could be rented and they could build sets on it. The only tiny issue they had was there was a 1960s tower block on the left-hand side. When the model makers basically decided to, build a model of the whole area and the sets they want to build, they also built a model of the tower block, and you see it in some of the sort of the backroom stills. And this was basically to help the camera crews and decide, well, how are we going to film this thing and avoid that? I mean, just an incredible serendipity that you had this bridge, you had the car park, you had the fact that, the other side of it was just farmland, which is exactly what Arnhem looked at the time, was incredibly lucky. And the fact that they could shut it, I think they shut it for about 6 weeks and basically used a ferry to ferry people across. And I think there was a story that the footbridge could be open for 1 hour every day, and apparently a lot of the guys used to enjoy seeing the Dutch ladies on their bicycles going across the bridge. That was sort of quite a highlight on the day. So that was the only time that it was kind of open. But on the whole, the locals were sort of very happy to be sort of part of the film, and also almost all of them take part in the Eindhoven sequence where. With the 30 Corps sort of driving through what was supposed to be Eindhoven is in fact the city centre of Deventer, and that's all basically the Deventer locals. I think 2,000 people sort of turning out there.
It must have pumped a tremendous amount of money into the local economy and be massively exciting, if not slightly annoying, for 6 months.
As I said, the core of the actors were these guys called the APA, who were a bunch of 50 actors who were trained to fight like soldiers. And apparently I'm pretty sure this hadn't been done before. Now it's standard practice. If you make a war film. This
is Attenborough's private army, the APA.
Private army. And this hadn't been done before. But of course, perhaps in the 60s when more war films were made, virtually all the men, actors, whatever, they were all ex-servicemen, weren't they? They'd all had national service. So, but obviously the guys, young men in their 20s in 1976 weren't. So they all basically long hair with their flares and all the rest of it. So anyway, they were trained as soldiers, and they certainly passed muster. General Frost was very, very impressed with them. So obviously at the end of the day, they would hit the Deventer nightlife, and I think they partied very, very hard, is the impression I get. Because of course they had a lot of money in their pockets. They were put up in an old orphanage, so there was no accommodation to pay for, and they had 3 huge meals a day, thanks to the catering company. And it was basically money. It was just spending money.
Does the APA, they play both sides, don't they? They are literally just, you need some Germans, right, off you go. We need some British, American, just change uniform.
Yeah. If you look carefully at the film, you can see a couple of faces pop up. Most of them actually do get a credit at the end. For instance, Sebastian Abineri, who wrote a sort of memorandum book, I think he's called Sergeant Treadwell in the end of it. But Sergeant Treadwell probably has a sort of a second and a half close up during the battle. So I think each one there would be one part that they would have thought, all right, we'll credit him as that. But on the whole, they played everything. Most of them tried not to be seen, weirdly, which is weird as actors, because as soon as they were seen in close-up, they were sent home. So most of them tried to sort of find ways to avoid that. They'd sort of...
You don't want that line.
No, they don't want that line. So the most prominent is Tim Morand, and he's in the... when Sean Connery is rescued, from the...
he's been in the attic in the house, surrounded by Germans.
Yeah, so there's sort of a bunch of paratroopers come out and they sort of attack the Germans, and there's a corporal. So I thought, this is the German, it's the general. Oh, that's Tim Morand, But he didn't get sent home, but he was told you need to be in the background. And so he tells various sort of stories about, I think at one point when he's marching into the the village at the start of the campaign, he's holding a girl, this 6-year-old girl on his shoulder, who became a bit of a star apparently. So they all came up with lots of little sort of techniques to be hidden from the camera.
If you look at from the star's point of view, though, how much of a problem having so many star actors? Are they all looking over their shoulder, commenting on each other's roles, suggesting that some of those lines should be mine, or I don't really want to say that.
I don't think there was much of that. Apparently, Attenborough did say that there was one person that he found an absolute pain in the ass, but wouldn't name that person. On another project, on a new project I'm working on, I was speaking to a chap on that who worked with Attenborough on another project later on, and he did actually give the name away. And but I'm not actually going to say who it is. I think you can glean it from the book, So I sort of try to honour Attenborough's kind of discretion there, really. But so essentially, there was only one. There was only one that was a pain in the arse, so everyone else was it was great. I think Connery had a bit of an issue at his pay. He felt he should have been paid more, and so he did sort of dig his heels in. But I think that's fair enough. But there's no suggestion he was anything other than completely professional on set, where it mattered.
And many of the people who these stars would be portraying were still alive in the 70s. Roy Urquhart, Brian Horrocks, Jim Gavin. Did they get involved with the film? Are they turning up and correcting things?
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean, particularly Frost. And there's the immortal story, which I think Anthony Hopkins, I found him saying it at least 6 times in different interviews, and it's a wonderful story. So there's a scene in the film where he's got to run across, under the bridge to the other houses and sort of avoiding the sniper bullets. And I think in the first take he ran, as an actor would. And Frost came up and said, no, this is completely wrong. You're running too fast, much too fast. We would never run that fast. We wanted to show contempt to the Germans. And, Attenborough sort of laughed about, the story. And I think they had to find some sort of compromise, something that didn't look too ridiculous. Because I think Goldman's take on it from thinking from the point of an audience is thinking, well, why wouldn't you run? It's nuts not to run. The other thing I was going to say about the script, it's a tiny little detail. When you read the script, he writes the script as an audience member, which is really quite interesting. And when you read a lot of his thoughts about how scenes should be played, he's always thinking about what's the audience going to think. So, for instance, when he describes the bridge, he describes how you would see it as an audience. It's a big thing. It's beautiful. Da, da, da. So he was very aware how things came across. And I think another sort of story that I think is quite interesting, he did have a real not falling out, but he got very upset that he'd upset Frost. Because one of the most famous, most fondly remembered scenes in the film is the surrender scene. And everybody remembers that.
I was crying with laughter this morning when I rewatched it.
We don't have the proper facilities. Now, of course, when you watch that film, it makes absolute perfect sense that it's Christopher Goode's Captain Carlyle who says it. You're thinking, well, you've set him up from the very, very...
So this is where the Germans come across the bridge and ask Frost and his men to surrender.
Yes. And Carlyle basically just sort of swaps it round and said, well, no, I'm sorry, we'd love you to surrender. We don't have the proper facilities. Apparently that did happen, but not quite in the same way, not by the same person, but a similar thing happened. So again, Goldman took the nugget of something and took it. Now, in the original script, all that was Frost. That was Hopkins. Hopkins was supposed to say all that. And again, Goldman's justification was said, you always give the best lines to a star. That's what you do. That's the Hollywood thing. That's what you do. If you think about it, the star always has to shine. So he was basically doing his job. And Frost read this and he just said, no, you're making much too much of myself. I can't possibly, I'm really quite offended by this. I really don't want this. So Goldman said, well, would you object to the same lines being spoken by somebody else? So your character is there when you said it. So, no, I don't mind that at all. So the lines were then handed to Christopher Goode's Carlyle, which seems bizarre because it seems so natural, doesn't it? It's an absolute natural extension of the character. And Frost is sort of, tell him to go to hell. He's very matter of fact, very sort of, well, we're not interested, go to hell. There's no sort of poetry there, is it? Carlyle brings the poetry. So I think that was a kind of really classic example of the sort of the tightrope that Goldman had to walk. And again, I think he listened, and I think him and Frost, they went out, they went out to dinner and they had a real proper conversation about it. So there was a lot of mutual respect, and I think Goldman was really quite upset about the whole thing. He said, I really upset this man who I have huge amount of respect for, and thinking, why am I doing it? He was really quite profoundly shocked by it, that he'd upset this man. But anyway, it all came right, and it all came right in the end.
Simon, we're going to pause it there, folks. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. I'm joined by Simon Lewis, and we're discussing A Bridge Too Far. There's that slightly strange documentary there. I wasn't quite sure if it's a documentary about the making of the film or a documentary about Market Garden, which is it called Report Arnhem?
Arnhem Report, yes.
Arnhem Report. And it's quick because Roy Urquhart interviewed, and I couldn't help but I thought, well, that's interesting because you clearly are happy to be interviewed. So that would assume that you've seen the script and you're happy to see what's going on. So how they're portraying you're comfortable with, which adds a certain authenticity of what's going on.
When I, obviously carried on research, I found out there was a huge furore when the film came out, basically centered on Bogarde and his portrayal as Browning. And there was a huge amount of, shall we say, letters to the Times of ex-servicemen complaining and being quite offended, even somebody saying, this is like libel, something that there should be court action taken. And it was a very, very unfortunate set of circumstances. What is interesting from the research I've done, I couldn't find any of those significant figures involved with the film, like Urquhart and Frost. They were completely silent. They didn't get involved at all. You can read into that whatever you want. Perhaps they just didn't feel it was appropriate, or maybe they didn't fully agree with it. But it was a very unfortunate kind of furore, really. The
interesting about that is that Bogarde was on Browning's staff, wasn't he, during the war?
Yes, as a very, very junior level. But he has seen him. I think the sort of suggestion that I get, and I couldn't really quite nail it down, was that obviously Bogarde was well known as a homosexual, and I think there was kind of certain gamuts of people feeling that, how dare a gay man play such a masculine, heterosexual soldier, all this kind of stuff. Browning's widow did actually say that, but she said it in a private letter. She didn't actually say that publicly, but you get a sense that was kind of feeding into the sort of the disapproval of his performance. If people say, oh, well, he's nothing like Browning. Browning was nothing like this. I'm thinking, well, I think he looked, when I've seen film of Browning, seems pretty accurate, seems pretty similar, I think it's very good casting.
It's kind of how I always imagined Browning as well, because Browning he's married to Daphne du Maurier, and I always sort of felt he had that kind of artistic, cultural clubbableness to him that Bogarde brings to the role. And maybe it's because I've been so familiar with the film for so long that I've transposed that across, but that is sort of how I always felt he was sort of portrayed. He is an odd soldier with this sort of cultural side to him, via his wife and his interests, which I think most of the British actors really shine through the whole film.
I think the other problem was, and it's not necessarily down to him, there was real objection, certainly from Daphne du Maurier, over how culpable Browning was for the operation. She asked to see a copy of the script before they started filming, which Attenborough did supply, and she felt that it sounded like Browning knew about the Germans around Arnhem and was basically sending these men to die. And so she wanted a scene where her husband is sort of, remonstrating with Montgomery and say, oh, we can't possibly send these guys there and the rest of it. And I think the compromise that they came to, and I think it's very subtle, but I think it works. It's the very, very last line of the film. He says, as you know, I think we went a bridge too far. In the original draft, he said, I think we went a bridge too far. And the sort of the implication being is that he'd kind of thought about it, he discussed it, so he was sort of aware of it. It's a difficult one, really, isn't it? I mean, I think it was unfortunate for the filmmakers, for everybody involved, that he died. If he'd been still alive, I suspect he probably would have been pretty relaxed about the whole thing, actually. But he would have, think everybody would have been happier that he would have had some sort of involvement with it. But it was just unfortunate that he had died, and not Frost or Urquhart or all the rest of it.
You say that, but it's a rabbit hole historians still go down, is who knew what when and who told what. So him being alive might not even have helped. I was going to ask about, again, what struck me watching it back, that iconic moment of the parachute drop is just awesome. I mean, there's lots of lovely military vehicle shots, and you think, oh, well, after the war, you're so close to the end of the war. We're so close to the end of the war, it's still 30 years ago. You can get the kit and the tanks and the this, that. But that parachute drop is phenomenal. How does that all get put together? Where do they find all the Dakotas? Because this is obviously filmed at a time before we've got CGI, and editors don't necessarily like to use optical effects because they're slow and take a lot of messing about. How do they capture that big drop?
Well, they found 11 Dakotas. I mean, if you think about it, Dakotas were still in service because they were essentially transport planes, and so their use hadn't really, was still as valid in the sort of civilian world. So there was still quite a lot knocking around. So it wasn't too difficult to find them. So anyway, they found these 11 machines. Of course, they were a little bit temperamental and needed lots of sort of loving care. But anyway, they had this fleet that they used. And for the actual drop, they used the parachute regiment, the current British parachute regiment, who I think they were on the way to a NATO training operation. So there was a little window where they would be available for a week or so in September 76. They had to get some retraining because if you think about it at the time and as is now, they just jump out the back of Hercules. So you literally just open the back of the Hercules and you jump out. So they had to be trained to jump out of the little tiny doors on Dakotas where I think, the chutes just automatically pull them out, and that all had to be safety checked, the rest of it. So that was done. Those guys came over. I think it was the sequence that Attenborough was most worried about. He was most scared about because he said, once you set the thing going as a director, you have nothing to do. It's anything can happen. It's all out of your control. Anything, the wind, all these guys dropping out the air, they've got to land on the ground, make sure they're all safe. The way they did it, they had on the ground, they had all the APA and a whole load of Dutch extras all holding parachutes. And the way it worked is the guys would jump out the Dakotas, the cameras would pan down. That was quite complicated. They had to work out the right speed to pan down. So the idea is as they pan down and, the guys sort of landing on the ground, by then you'd have all these other men who were already on the ground running around. So it was all sort of sleight of hand. So it looked like far more actually did it. And I think they used, it was about 20 odd cameras, something like that, cameras all over the place to capture it. And one of my favorite shots is the camera actually attached to one of the guys jumping out. So you see this point of view shot. There was some optical effects work, not very much. Very, very subtle. There's a couple of shots. There's one shot where they multiply, I think you see 30, maybe 40. I think you see 40 Dakotas. And that's basically just a sort of fairly basic optical replication. There's only a handful of shots.
There's one on the airfield I noticed before they took off.
Yeah, that's a matte painting. Yes.
Is it? Yes. Is that what it is? And then, yes, there's some in the air. I spotted that as well. But there really isn't that many. It's an incredible scene.
And a very slight side. One shot I did find that I don't think anyone had ever seen before on the infamous tea making sequence where Redford sort of admonishes the British colonel about, you're just sitting there drinking tea. The wide shot, if you see the wide shot, in the background, you see the top of Nijmegen Bridge. And I remember watching it and thinking, there's something not quite right here. And I've got a home projector, and I thought, I'm being very anal on these things. I paused it and slowed down the picture, and I suddenly, but only very slightly, you realise it's a matte painting. And but I thought, what a beautifully executed thing. Absolutely beautifully executed. But there was very little of that. Virtually everything in that film, virtually every single shot, with the literal exception of probably, I think, 7 shots, is all done for real. The only other thing with the early shots of the Armada flying over England, that was obviously special effects. So there's a great shot of the street scene. I think that was shot somewhere outside London, so obviously that's a optical combination shot, but virtually everything else in the film is all for real.
The other really clever thing is the glider not taking off, but you think you've seen the glider take off.
Yeah. Well, no, you do. It does actually take off. They had one glider.
Do you actually see it? You don't see its wheels take. I don't recall seeing its wheels actually take off. You see one trundle along.
That's right, yeah.
You see the rope.
That's it. Yeah.
You see the inside shot. going in the air, but you never see the glider
actually taking off.
leave the land.
No, I've forgotten the name now. They found another a proper flyable glider, a modern glider that slightly replicate. I think the attachments are slightly different if you look very carefully. So they had one that they could use, but yeah, for most of the time they could taxi these things along the ground, but they couldn't take off with them. I think the only tiny thing I wish they'd had a crack at trying to land one. All you need to see literally is scudding across a field, and they didn't do that. I mean, they could have done it. They probably couldn't have done it as a miniature because it's daylight. They probably wouldn't have got away with it. They do it the longest day. There is one of the longest day, but it's at night, and I think that gets away with it. But yeah, perhaps it's not necessary. It's really not necessary. You see the gliders are already there anyway.
They shoot a mere 55 hours of rushes for that 3-hour film, which is, it might sound like a lot, but that's incredibly frugal. I once worked in a feature film it was an hour and a half, and we shot 40 hours, and they thought that was 2004. And if you shoot a feature film now, you'll probably shoot hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours because you don't have to buy the film, which is expensive. But I wondered how smoothly that editing process went. I mean, editing could go wonderfully smoothly, or it could be horrendous as things get moved about, the story retold. It's often a key moment that completely gets overlooked. Yeah,
well, judging from the script, there's very little that isn't in the final film. There was a sort of, in the preparation sequence, there were sort of supposed to be two characters that would sort of make comments about the planning problems. There was American and British, and I don't even know whether that was shot. It's kind of the kind of points made. So anyway, that didn't make it in. There was certainly in the script a complex sequence of seizing the Grave Bridge. So the Grave Bridge, you do see it in the film. And I think it's just north of Eindhoven, and you see the sort of the Americans going over there. There was quite a lengthy sequence, about 3-4 pages, so 3 or 4 minutes of seizing the bridge. But the crucial point about the Grave Bridge is it was basically virtually bloodless. It was a walkover. I still can't find out whether it was even shot, and so it might have been something might have been dropped. But obviously it was certainly cut. But actually, in terms of dramatic terms, you don't need it, because the scene where Elliott Gould races up to HQ and you've got the radio operator say, "We've taken the goddamn Grave Bridge," says it all. In narrative terms, that one line says it all. So, well, it doesn't matter about that. Well, the goddamn Sun Bridge is down, So anyway, that's not in there. And the only other thing, they employed a vast second unit that came over in August for about 6 weeks, and their primary job was to film a very lengthy sequence of the detachment of the 82nd pushing through Nijmegen to Nijmegen Bridge. And I found an article which this reporter spent a day and a half with the second unit and sort of describes the various scenes that they were filming, but none of that made it in. Absolutely not a frame of that made it in. But fundamentally, very, very little is cut. Little scenes, the odd line here and there. So from an editing point of view, obviously it was that kind of thing would be a difficult thing to do. But I think essentially it was pretty much stuck to the script. It was always going to have to be under 3 hours, so it would have been cut to that. I could imagine maybe the rough cut might have been 4 hours, 3.5 hours, 4 hours. But those lengthy action sequences, you cut those down, don't you? You just think, how much of this do you need? And I think another thing I think is quite interesting about it, I think the problem that war films have is repetition. How do you make actions differently? And it only really struck me that, of course, that's the one great thing with fiction. If you look at a Bond film might have half a dozen action sequences, and I'm sure somebody will probably dispute it, but I'm pretty sure if you look at pretty much any fictional action film, every single action sequence is different from the others. It's a different set of weapons, different settings. It looks different. War films don't have that. If you're being authentic. Where A Bridge Too Far is incredibly lucky is it's actually got several very different types of action. Obviously, you've got the river crossing, you've got the attack on the bridge, you've got 30 Call. But if you really think about it, they tend not to come back to too much sort of house-to-house fighting. And I think that's probably why that second unit stuff dropped out of it. Towards the end of the film, you do feel, oh, there's a little bit too much, a little bit fighting around the bridge, but you can see that there's only as much in there that needs to be in there. So I think there clearly was a desire to, let's have quite defined different action sequences, different types of thing here, so it looks different.
I never thought of it that way. You're right. Well, it comes back to, I'm not completely sure how much of an action film it is.
Good point. No, now we've come to thought that point. Yeah, I don't think it is. I mean, there's a lot of action in it, but it's not an action film, is it? Really?
No, and it has its moments. There's bring up the pitch. It has those moments, but then it's not necessarily a sort of a great big action film. How well did it do in the box office? Because what's curious is it's released against the same year as Star Wars.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it came out, I think Star Wars came out in May, and, it absolutely just, completely soaked up the sort of, the box office time. I think it struggled, but I think it did okay. It did obviously better in the UK and sort of Commonwealth countries. And then it was sort of re-released in, about 1980, 1981. So it's made a modest profit. It's certainly not a flop, and I don't know where that's come from, but I wouldn't say it was a massive blockbuster success, but it made a profit, and subsequent releases on DVD and all the rest of it certainly put it handsomely into the black, really. So yeah.
Simon, that seems like a good place to wind it up. Thanks, I really did enjoy the book. Folks, if you want to know more about this iconic film, the book to pick up is Making a Bridge Too Far. I'll put a link in the show notes and on the website. Now, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget you can sign up to be a patron of the show, patreon.com/WW2 Podcast. Patrons of the show have access to a custom RSS feed to use with their podcast software of choice to get advert-free episodes. And I do make extras available when I have them, so watch out for more from Simon and I chatting. So to sign up, that is patreon.com/WW2 Podcast. Next time, Mark Stilley will join me again and we will be discussing Midway. So until then, I'm Angus Wallace and thanks for listening.
Jerry 88mm gun hit our tank, blew us the hell out of it.
Stalingrad can never be repaired.
As Allied Commander-in-Chief, I have granted a military armistice